Welcome to Braver Leaders, the podcast where we meet with some of the world's best leaders and chat through where they got leadership right, but importantly, where they got it very wrong. Where they stuffed it up, got reprimanded, suspended, or even fired, and all the gory details that go with it. Each week, we'll meet with a new leader, hear their trials, tribulations, and what they have learned from their experiences. Leadership isn't always pretty, is it? But by being vulnerable and talking about our shortcomings, you can grow the empathy within your team and show your team that you're worthy of their trust. So buckle up and let's get ready to hear what it takes to be a braver leader. Welcome to Braver Leaders, the podcast where we ask leaders to own their story, share it, and create trust. I am Sam Harvey, your host. I'm a researcher, founder of Braver Leaders, and team performance coach. And today, I am very, very excited because I've got my very good friend, Charlotte Stebbing-Mills, who is the founder of the Wellness Theory, on the podcast. And our biggest challenge today is making sure that we don't talk for 3 hours.
That's exactly it, isn't it? I was like, yeah, I'm super excited too. And I'm like, this is going to go one way or another.
Yeah, 100%. How are you, my friend?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm really, really happy to be here. How are you doing?
Yeah, very, very well. Thank you. Very well. Do you want to just intro yourself before we kick off?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, my name's Charlotte. I'm the co-founder of the Wellness Theory. And essentially, we're an award-winning team that's based here in the UAE. And we specialise in stress relief and collaborative workplace wellbeing solutions. And essentially, what that means is we work with high-performing individuals and organisations, typically to overcome burnout, anxiety, overwhelm. And we do that through helping people navigate the complexities of both wellness and well-being at work. And yes, they are two slightly different things, which I'm sure we'll dive into at some point in this conversation.
Oh yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. I'd love to hear kind of what the different definitions are. Before we do that though, like as I've said to you just before we started chatting, I want to hear what your personal story is, and I know you've got quite a deep one. So can we start there and just get you to share a little bit about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny, isn't it? Because it's like, you know, we get to a certain age, it's like, what's your personal story? And we have to condense like all these years into like a few minutes, really, to become
Actually,
like...
that's a dating question, right? Like, tell your story in 4 minutes. I mean, how would I know that? I don't know.
Oh, there you go. Well, we'll stick with the personal story rather than dating story for this. So basically, so to give you some context as to kind of like a bit around like what's led me to do what I do today, I think it's probably most relevant for your audience.
Yeah.
So I joined the world of wellness and well-being in 2005, right? So I was specialized in cardiac rehab and prevention. I was working to transform the lives of people who have had heart attacks and strokes and wanted to update their lifestyles, essentially. So I was working closely with the NHS and bridging the gap between kind of like medical interventions and commercial health and well-being, and helping people when they get back into the community. And that led me to becoming quite well known and a real strong leader within the commercial fitness space. And that brought me over to the UAE. So I'm originally from the UK. And when I came to the UAE, I held a number of different roles within an organisation, and that led me to become the national programming manager for teams and health facilities across UAE, Saudi, Kuwait, and Jordan. And it was all in amongst kind of managing and creating programming for the betterment of well-being, right? And all the while I was doing this, like that, and this is all I've known in my whole career, and I like was fresh out of college, was always into sports and fitness and well-being. So it's all I've ever known. But the reason why this is so important to my personal story, like the professional element, is because ironically, like I became somebody that really needed support of people that understood well-being, and in a whole different level to what I'd ever experienced before.
Interesting.
So let me kind of set the scene for you then, because I kind of know where you I think you want me to kind of go with this, because it is so important and there's not enough people perhaps talking about it. Is 2014, I was in that role where I was like leading teams of over 1,000 people across the GCC, and I was really finding my own struggles, right? I remember living in Abu Dhabi, and I was flying to countries, often 2 to 3 in 1 week, and I was responsible for all sorts of different projects people, and being in that kind of space, you have to show up, right, with a smile on your face, giving as much as you can possibly give. And I found myself really starting to drown in the workload, but not only that, within my own unresolved stuff that I didn't even know was there. The weird thing is that as a leader, I was really leaning into one of my greatest strengths, which is responsibility. And and as I led into more responsibility, it made me feel good, right? It made me feel like I was doing well, right? But at the same time, like, the paradox is, at the same time, I was completely exhausted. I didn't know if I was coming or going. I felt like I was going through the motions often, and I felt quite distant and quite disconnected. Often my mind was racing, struggling to sleep at night. It was kind of a bit wired, if you know what that feels like, and a bit kind of like fritz on internally, and like kind of in my mind. I barely had the energy to hang out with friends and family. My days had literally become like survive the day, rinse and repeat. I was starting to exercise less, but I was eating more of what I knew wasn't good for me. And what was really frustrating was that I knew better, right? Intellectually, I knew better. I know that this was going to feed into a negative loop. However, there was a part of me that was really struggling, and I didn't really know what to do with that, right? And one night at my apartment in Abu Dhabi, I come home from work. I remember it very clearly. I went into my bedroom, I shut the door, and I just burst into tears. I literally kind of just dropped to my knees, and I was crying, and it felt really kind of uncontrollable, and I didn't know what to do with that. And it was really, it's strange now for me to look back, because it feels like a different person to some extent when I kind of like visualize what that was like. But I got to the point where I was feeling so bad that I had all these thoughts in my head, and I was feeling overwhelmed, and this like impending sense of doom that I felt, and sadness that was creeping in, and I was literally shaking, and I just wanted it to stop. So, and I got to the point where I wanted to end it all. I wanted out, and the only way I thought out was to end my life. And clearly I didn't. Okay, hence we're having this conversation. But I got to the point where I thought that was my only option. And I remember tying it was this blue and white scarf up around the top of wardrobes. And anyone that lives in the UAE, ceilings are usually pretty high. Your wardrobes are pretty enormous compared to most places in the world. And I tied this scarf to the top of that, and I tied it around my neck. And I thought that was it, and that was going to be the time to go. And I even remember now, and as I think about it now, I can still feel it. Just thinking that was it. That was going to be the moment that I'd take my last breath. And fortunately, I didn't. There was something, and I honestly, hand on heart, can't tell you what that was, but I felt like this surge of energy was like almost like woke me up, and was like, what am I doing? And I literally like pulled it down, and then fell into even more emotion, this cocktail of then a bit of relief, of guilt, of shame, of confusion. And it was pretty horrendous. And at that point, I knew that wasn't what I needed to follow through with and do. But at the same time, I also didn't know what to do next. Unfortunately, I then did get the help and support that I needed to understand how did I get to that point. And I worked with a therapist, worked on my own healing, and it was an extreme response to burnout, but not burnout just of my lifestyle and kind of the work that I was in, but also I come to learn there was a lot of emotional well-being factors that I didn't even consider. There were things that I didn't learn growing up that perhaps other people did, right? And there was so many gaps then in the mental health side of things, and there was so much work I'd done. And what baffles me in all of the training I've done, I've so many qualifications and so many different angles I've looked at health and well-being, and in that time there was nothing around emotional well-being and mental health in those texts, in those studies, in any of it. And other than a bit of mindset stuff, there was some light mindset stuff, right, around goals and this kind of stuff. And there's a little bit in like personal development at that time, but not really around emotional wellness and mental health. So if that wasn't then present, I learned all of that, and I was like, okay, well, how does this all fit together for an individual that needs to be able to function in this world in a way that actually they can find peace and happiness? And that was what then led me to obviously go deeper in my own learning and understanding, so that I can now obviously support with our business today.
Wow. Whoa, what a story. Hey, like, thank you for sharing it. And I think, yeah, it made me quite emotional actually hearing that, So yeah, I'm very grateful for you sharing it. And I think yeah, it's I think what kind of went on for me is it's just I look at you now and you're like this pillar of kind of, positivity, happiness, well-being. You really take care of yourself. And I think both, is that fair to say? Like that you emotionally and physically take care of yourself, right?
Yeah, 100%. Because I know how to now, right? That doesn't mean every day's perfect, and I just live in peace and harmony every day and every moment. Like I'm still human, and doubt creeps in, and different
Yeah.
emotions creep in. But it's having the capacity and the tools to know, okay, well, what is this bringing up for me? What is it representing? How do I navigate this period of my life, or these feelings that are coming up? So yes, I do, but I think it would be a disservice perhaps to anyone listening, thinking, suddenly we go from that extreme to the extreme of being happy and optimistic and positive all of the time, because actually no, there's some middle ground there. There's living from a place of resource is
Yeah.
what I try to anchor myself into. And
Mm.
I can be resourceful even if I feel sad. I can be resourceful
Yeah.
even if I feel like, the world is sunshine and rainbows, that I can anchor into that resource, that middle ground.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think the something else that you touched on, the kind of shame that comes with that stuff. I felt that myself, as you know, very recently, and it's like um, it's such a powerful kind of powerful drug in and of itself, shame, isn't it? Because it drives such interesting behavior, but the ability to be able to talk about it, I think, that's actually probably something which comes quite a bit later, or I'm not sure, but that finding those resources to be able to deal with that, and anybody listening that you see that quite regularly. It's not a weakness to talk, it's not weakness to discuss this stuff, but I think that is something which might come later. What was your resource that you went to start kind of unpacking that and getting through it yourself?
Yeah, definitely. Like, so there's two things I want to pick up on there, and I don't want to skip over it. It's the shame piece. Um, Shame has a lot to do with our identity,
Mm.
right? Brené Brown says it really well, which is like guilt is when we do something bad,
Yep.
and shame is when we think we are bad. Right.
Mm.
And for me, in those moments, I saw them as moments of absolute weakness. And yes, I felt weak, but I thought that I was a weak person, that I couldn't cope, that everybody else in the world had it figured out, and I didn't. And plus, on top of that, being in the industry that I'm in, I'm supposed to be the one that's fit and healthy and happy and
Mm.
smiling all the time. And so my identity was so wrapped up in what I thought I was supposed to be, that translated to a lot of shame. But I didn't know the difference at that time, and I clearly didn't know who I was. And I think that's been a massive part of my recovery, is understanding, well, who am I? Who am
Yeah.
I choosing to
Yeah.
be? What is my nature? What makes sense for me? And that I learned from, to answer your follow-up question, I learned from reaching out initially to therapy, and I did that. I wrote an email. So all of that scenario, like that rock bottom night, is kind of what I refer to it in my mind.
Yeah.
Is I wrote an email. I was too scared to pick up the phone, and it was quite late at night, but I could have left a message. But I wrote an email to a therapist
Yeah.
that I found just on Google,
Yeah.
in Abu Dhabi. And fortunately, she wrote back first thing in the morning and said, "Come and see me today." Um, and all I wrote in the email is, "I think I need help." And then I went in, and fortunately, I saw her that day. If I hadn't, I don't know if I would have put it off, brushed it under the carpet. It's okay. I feel better today. I don't know. But that first reaching out, I didn't have the guts to pick up the phone. I definitely didn't have the guts to go and tell a friend or a family member this is how I felt, because I didn't know how to describe it. And even when I went into that therapy office and spoke to this lovely lady, I didn't know how to explain what had happened. Like, I literally didn't have the
Mm.
words, and then all this emotion come pouring out. So definitely the ability to articulate it comes over time, to then
Yeah.
be able to navigate the experience. But for me, the first stop was therapy, speaking to someone. At that point, honestly, I was quite desperate, but I knew it needed to be somebody outside of people who knew me. I didn't feel, I want to say, safe to share it with people around me, because I didn't want to worry them, and I didn't want to concern them, because that would have made me feel even more wobbly than I already was. So reaching out to somebody completely independent was a huge like stepping stone. And then from there, I went from kind of therapy to coaching
Yeah.
to doing my own qualifications and all sorts of various different kind of avenues I've explored.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. Yeah, I relate a lot. I think January this year, I'd been in therapy for a while, but like yeah, I remember feeling terrible and just doing the exact same thing actually, sending an email. And yeah, the person came back very quickly and yeah, and was in, I mean, it was online, but still was in therapy sessions very, very quickly shortly thereafter. So yeah, okay. Look, again, I'm so grateful for you sharing. And I think um, it's a testament really to the power of just asking for help, isn't it? And whatever that looks like for anybody, I think, and there's this one of my favorite articles is this it's called In Praise of the Incomplete Leader. And just the fact that context is everything in the world we live in. Everybody has this whole array of context happening behind them at all times, and we all expect these people. And I'm kind of segueing here to what we want to talk about today, which is building a well organization, being a well leader, and talking about what you do in businesses. But it's just that whatever works for you in that moment in your context, do it. Because I read a stat yesterday. I think it's 800,000 people around the world each year die by suicide. And it's just mad, like that. It's not, maybe that's a bad way to say that. I just sort of caught myself as I said it, but it blows my mind that, that we could, that we, that's the stat. And just if it's that one thing that you go, just ask for help, just send one message, just whatever it is that feels okay for you in your context, do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah,
I
I
think
really appreciate you.
it's hugely powerful, right? Just asking for help, but at the same time, it takes courage to do so. So I would even
Yeah.
say before we ask for help, if it's possible, lean into whatever courage you can find, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think I saw it on a movie once. I can't even remember what movie it was, but it's like 20 seconds of courage can change your life completely. And it takes courage to take that step. So find whatever that is. And it might be courage that you're doing it for somebody else. It might be that you don't want to disappoint family or friends or whatever. And it might be that you borrow that courage from somewhere else. If even if you can't conjure it up for yourself. But I think that kind of comes first. And I think everybody is born with courage. It
Mhm.
just gets masked often by this overlay of emotion and all that context that you described that kind of falls behind us many
Yeah.
times.
Yeah. I love that. Okay, so let's fast forward a bit then. And so now you spend a lot of time with leaders, with organizations, really helping them understand how to embed well-being and well-being practices. But I'm guessing it all kind of stems from this, right? I mean, you were in that game before, but weren't looking after yourself. So now you have a much more holistic view of what it takes.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like it wasn't just me that wasn't looking after myself. I don't feel like I was also looked after. And that's not to blame
Mm,
anyone, but
no.
it's to, I think, highlight the importance of shared responsibility, because I think we do have a responsibility for the people around us. And I feel like other people, particularly the people I was working with, there were so many signs. When I look back now and kind of I could play out different scenarios in my mind of things that kind of stick out. And I'm like, that was so out of character. That was so not me, or not even not me. This was not healthy. It was not okay for me to perhaps respond in that situation in as overwhelmed as I needed to be, or to really hone in on this one situation that wasn't a big deal at all in hindsight, and there's all these little things that happen and they get overlooked, particularly in the workplace and in the family home, but particularly in the workplace. And I
Mm,
think in the workplace, we also have the added benefit that we are not usually so emotionally involved, right? So family members might think, oh, that's out of character if you say or do something, but they're invested in you. They're not independent to you. But in the workplace, there are, you should ideally have a supportive environment where people can pick up these little nuances that maybe are
mm,
not quite hitting the mark compared to perhaps what they're used to with you as well. So I think there's a massive responsibility in that. Even you and I, Sam, the amount of times I've said to you, like, are you rested? Are you looking after yourself?
true.
And you've said the same back to me. Right. And that's a supportive environment. I mean, it's a
Mm,
bit different for us because we're entrepreneurs, and like teams look different and the way we work with other people looks different. But find that supportive environment in a way that makes sense. And I think as leaders, we must, it's a responsibility for us to do it. And that doesn't mean you take everybody's problems on your shoulders. It means you're open to be able to perhaps mirror back sometimes some of the issues that are coming up and bringing them into the light. Because only when we bring into the light we can do something with them. And that's what led me into working with organizations is so the wellness theory, we actually our business started off predominantly just coaching, and it was coaching. In the beginning, it was coaching anybody needed support in that space, but then it really shifted gears into working with leaders, because leaders were consistently coming after hearing my story, hearing my husband, who's also the co-founder of the Wellness Theory, his experience as well. It's again a very significant turning point in his well-being as well. And they hear these stories and like, okay, there's something we need to learn here. And therefore, we was coaching these people. Incredible leaders, like people that have achieved way more than perhaps I've ever achieved, particularly in business and even in the commercial space. And it was fascinating to me, because underneath it all, we're all made up of the same stuff. You know, we're all experience similar things. And it was only when they got such great results and understood that actually now they have not only a responsibility, but they have the energy and the capacity to be able to support the people around them. They were like, Charlotte, can you come in and do this with our teams? Can you come in and do that with our teams? And that was how our business then evolved in this space. And ultimately now what we really focus on is helping leaders and not always like the CEOs, often the CEOs and the C-suite teams, but also their supporting teams as well. It's like we work with them to look at the strategy for the whole organization and how that has a ripple effect everywhere else. So we really look at strategy and all the different components to create systemic change within an organization, not just a nice fix of this wellness activity or that wellness activity. It's about looking at it and looking at all of the things that contribute to that burnout. Because in my experience that I shared, I was traveling a lot with work, but I was also training a lot. I was exercising less, but I was still exercising. I was still active. Most of my diet was still okay until I had these periods where I would be emotionally eating. So if somebody looked at my behaviors when it comes to wellness, actually I was ticking a lot of those boxes. So there was many other things happening that were contributing to it. So really what we do now is shine that light on what are all the contributing factors that could be causing your employees to feel this way, and what is within our control as an organization and what is within their control as an individual, and how do we meet in the middle to look at those things.
Love that. And you probably haven't seen this, but as you've been talking, I kind of thought of this ad which is played in the UK for a while about understanding and looking at the signs of somebody who's struggling. And it's two guys that go to a football match or a rugby match or whatever people watch.
Yeah,
have you seen it? Yeah. And the guy is so sad, and like to the guy, you kind of think it's going to be one guy, and then it's not, right? It's his mate who doesn't show up, and the following time, and that you don't know. And I love what you said about that, because you're right. Like your family can kind of look at you and go, "What's up with you? Like something's going on." Can't they? And I think actually we talked about this before, right? Because we were laughing about people having family culture as a, you know, and that's the mistake I've made. Won't do that one again. Of as a value in organizations. Well, maybe I will do it again. I don't know, but it means different things to everybody, doesn't it? And I think maybe that's what you were meaning when we talked about that before. Is like being as vigilant as a family member, almost to look out for the things where people are struggling in your organization, that kind of duty of care. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly it. And there's a saying, isn't there? You can't see the picture when you're inside the frame, right? And often we're very much in our own frame of life. You know, we're looking at the world from our picture, right? But often our family members or our close friends are inside that picture with us. So they also can't always see that. And in the workplace, typically we can zoom out and we can look at the picture and be like, okay, well, this is the situation. We do it all the time, right? We look at a business and we look at a P&L, we zoom out from the day-to-day behavior, whatever's happening in the business on a spreadsheet. Like we do it. We have to do it. We have the skill to zoom out and look at the 2025 strategy for the year. And we have that ability to do that with individuals as well, or as teams. And if we can empower our leaders to be able to spot these things and to be able to look at the picture, it really helps to then be able to navigate change.
I love that. I was mentioning my colleague before who I'm writing with. We're looking at, and this came to mind as we flip into two modes: explore and exploit. And exploit is sweating assets, got to move, do your stuff, work, work, work. Explore is changing mode to zoom out and go, what's coming? You know, what do we need to be aware of, right? And so many businesses spend so much time in exploit mode and never want to step into explore mode because it's deemed as slowing down. And it is slowing down to an extent, but actually, if you don't slow down, you're never going to speed up.
Exactly. It's like pulling a rubber band back, right? It's like it will feel like you're pulling back, but as soon as you let go with whatever the new plan is from what you found when you've been exploring and observing and looking at the picture, it propels you forwards no end. And there's so many stats to back it up. I mean, I know you do a lot of stuff around like teams, right? And the team performance and engagement is a big piece of that, right? Because teams can't perform if they're disengaged. And Gallup's doing, they've been doing it for ages, but an ongoing study about employee experience. And they're doing like this meta-analysis of all other studies that have been existing, right? And they've seen that teams that have higher engagement typically have, I think it's 23% more profitability than teams that are not. But for us to have high engaged teams, we need to take a step back and look at, okay, well, what engages them, you know? And there's a lot of evidence to say that well-being helps people to be engaged, right? So if we are looking at it from that perspective, and the fact that typically I think it's like $500 billion annually is lost in productivity because teams are disengaged. So if we are thinking that it's going to slow us down to pause and look at the root cause of why our teams are disengaged, then I think we're missing the mark completely. We're going down the wrong garden path. It's going to lead us completely to the wrong place, or at least to a place that's not as a better return on investment of efforts than what it could be.
Yeah, definitely. It's almost like it's not almost like it is. We are looking at things from a perspective of like a factory owner still, and saying, get to work, you know, just work harder. And I read, I think it was the Agile book, the guy who invented like Scrum. I forget his name, but the whole idea that we used to work a 7-day week, and then the Industrial Revolution brought the 5-day week, right? And they were like, whoa, people are actually more productive in 5 days. Why did we stop at 5 days? And it's like, like we didn't examine that enough, to your point, to go, well, okay, what's the actual productivity there? How many hours do people actually work in a day? We work an 8-hour day still. Why? But do you work 8 hours a day? I definitely don't. Like maybe some days I do, but then I definitely have probably a day off after that, and it's sort of, so actually examining that and going, well, what is productivity and what is engagement, and what's going to help people be that way? And so I guess I'm interested as well, like so you've got I think there's 19 components in your infinity symbol, is that right?
So we have a framework for your listeners that may have not seen that, or even if they're listening and can't see you doing the infinity sign with your finger. We have something that we call the well-working ecosystem, which is basically a well-being ecosystem, and this ecosystem is really a framework of which organizations and leaders can look at the picture, right? They can look at the picture completely objectively from a place of observation. So they can look and see, okay, well, actually, what is well-being? And if we can break it down through this lens, that we have this thing called well-being that is more around the well-being from a big picture perspective, let's say from an organization perspective. And then we have our individual employee wellness, right? We have these two things, right? And they really work together, right? You don't get one without the other, right? To have an organization, we have to have leadership. We have to have ideally a mission, right? And values, and there's goals that we have, and there's communication that needs to happen, right? There's an environment that needs to be created, right? So that's kind of one scope of it. And the other side of it is, like what we said earlier, is individuals need to have an understanding of their own wellness. They need to understand, how do they regulate themselves? Do they have enough social connection in their lives? Are they eating well? Do they have the energy to show up to work? Or are they falling into different health conditions, which then the organization is paying for, right? So there's this relationship that's happening consistently, and it's shaped like a infinity sign, because it's this constant dance between the two needs our attention. And what we're typically seeing in the set of organizations is they look at one thing, right? They'll look at employee wellness interventions, and they'll bring somebody in to do yoga sessions or a stress management course or stuff like that, which is okay and it has its place, but done alone, it's not going to help anything if you've still got a boss who's being really rude and creating a safe and unsafe environment for those people. It doesn't matter how well somebody can regulate themselves. If you trigger something within somebody else because of your behavior, right, that stuff can go out the window in a heartbeat, because most of the time individuals haven't done that deeper work that's really necessary. And that's okay. But what we need to do is just to zoom out and look at all of the elements that contribute to being well as an organization. And I won't go through all 19 of the kind of the points on that framework, but they are core things that I know you talk about a lot, Sam, in the work that you do, and the things that you consider in your own personal life, right? It's that having a sense of purpose and autonomy. It's being competent and being skilled at what you do. It is about having people who are aligned with the value system. You mentioned having a family value system earlier, right? And for some people that can be quite dysfunctional, right? If I've had, as an individual, if I've had a really tricky upbringing, right, and now I'm coming into an environment where everybody wants to be my surrogate mum, dad, friend, brother, sister, and we're all going to love each other, and we're not going to kind of communicate in ways that I'm used to, that's going to mess me up. As amazing as that might be, right, on paper, for somebody that's not used to that, that's going to freak them out, right? And that's just a tiny slice of the pie, you know, and we don't want to blur the lines. We want to like make things as clear as possible. And I think when we start to look at the whole picture first, and the relationship between perhaps a policy that you have in your organization and how that affects somebody's emotional well-being, for example, well, now we have these two things that can interact, and we can work with that, and we can tweak things, and we can change things, and we can adapt things, and we know how we can adapt things. But if we don't, and we think, well, the policy says this and this person just has to fall in line with it, then again, we're not creating space for wellness to even live.
Yeah, like co-creation, right? Like you're absolutely right. Like there's this one of my mentors, a lovely lady named Louise Mara. I mention her all the time on this podcast. In fact, I should get her on. I need to get her on. She's amazing. Talks about co-creating, right? A lot, because and even when we use the terms diversity and inclusion, or inclusion, she challenges that and says, inclusion into what? And so like really looking at co-creation, and so from your perspective, having that zoom out, that infinity symbol, and saying, what does that mean to you, employee or team member, and what does that mean to you, team leader, and what does that mean to you, Mr. or Mrs. or non-binary founder, whatever, like it's so important, isn't it? Because, and then having that open discussion of, well, this is what it means to me. And that, in my opinion, is where engagement comes from, because people are, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, is because people are able to say their bit out loud, and get something to which they can then engage, and they feel that it's aligned with their value system, or not, and maybe they leave, but like at least you kind of get that, you know, that you understand where you're at, right? Does that align with what you're thinking?
Yeah, definitely. I think every human being has the need to be seen, heard, and understood.
Yeah.
Right. And that doesn't mean agreed with and appeased to, right? And a lot of leaders listening to this might be like, well, I don't know. I've got thousands of employees. I haven't got time to sit with all of them and see how they feel about this one thing because there's so many things going on. So it can sometimes become a bit unrelatable. But actually, when we can understand what's happening within the consensus, what are the foundations that we can put into play that allow these things to come to light, and let everybody have their space, let everybody have be part of a system that gives them the space to be seen, heard and understood. Because from there, when they feel seen, heard and understood, well, they get to know who they are, they get to see themselves, they get to hear themselves, they get to understand themselves. And from that place, now we're operating from a place of resource, which makes me more productive in my job. It makes me a better communicator. It makes me better at asking for what I want and what I need, or even helping you figure out a way to solve a problem that is affecting me or somebody else in the team. So I think there's a lot of weight to what you've said, for sure.
Yeah, so I love that too. That kind of self-knowledge allows you to teach others how to teach you to treat you by setting clear boundaries, right?
Yeah, definitely. Boundaries are like one of the biggest challenges, I think, for a lot of people, right? And I think it does come from that being seen, heard and understood place, right? Is a lot of people overstep their own boundaries because they feel like they need to be seen, heard or understood. And if they overstep the boundary, then they will be. And actually, we got it the wrong way around. I think if we can do that bit first, well, then it's easier for people to have boundaries. And boundaries aren't to keep things out, right? Boundaries aren't for me to say no to my workload. Boundaries are there to be able to say, this is what's acceptable, this is what isn't. How can we work together to achieve this in the long term, not just in this moment?
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, so what would be your kind of top, I don't want to say 3 because, you know, you've got 19 on your list, but like your kind of top, let's say 2 to 4
Oh, I think it's more about the context. It's more of the context and understanding, one, what we've said there about that this is fluid. Well-being in the workplace is extremely fluid. It's never going to be a one size fits all. It's always going to be evolving. It's always going to be shifting. So I think that as a foundational point is critical, alongside the remembrance that all organizations is a collection of individuals. Right, and we forget that too often. We look at it as this is this entity. It's like, yeah, okay, but that entity exists because of all these other individual entities that are part of it that create it, right? So I think remembering that, because often we forget that, and that's where people then get neglected, the individuals get neglected, but also then the goals of the organization can get neglected because now we're not all on the same page. So just remembering that we are one tribe trying to come to the same place, I think, is also critical. So I think if we've got those 2 foundational understandings, and the understanding that there are many things that contribute to what it means to be well, then we can open the door to maybe the top ones. And I would say, to then answer your question, is leadership absolutely is up there. It has to be. We create the world that we live in, right? The co-creation that your mentor talks about it only happens when we interact with the world around us, right? And leaders help to create the environment that we get to interact with. So it's absolutely necessary that leaders are paying attention to their own self-awareness and how they're showing up in the world and the support that they need. So I think that is absolutely critical. Obviously we go into more of these if you want to. Give me I'll say maybe another top one, and then you can probe me more for another one. But I also think the understanding of what individuals really need, right? So from a wellness perspective, understanding what is employee wellness, what does it look like, what are the components that make that up? I think if we can get leadership right and we can get individual understanding right, everything else falls into place. Because if leaders understand what they need to be doing or who they need to be being, and if individuals understand what they need, well, then culture improves, then communication improves, then policy making improves, and then the environment improves, then health and safety improves, and then it has this knock-on effect to everything else.
Okay, so let me see how my summary goes here. So context matters. Looking at and remembering the fact that an organization is a collection of individuals, then zooming out, but starting with yourself as a leader before you then look outwards.
Yeah. Yeah,
How to do.
yeah, perfect. Exactly. Because as
Got
a
any job,
leader,
got any
you
jobs
you
going?
you start to find out, don't you, like how you operate as a human being,
Yeah.
right? And then you obviously from there you have this beautiful responsibility to be able to then, help other people do the same,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so if you then shine their light outward, then it just makes life so much easier.
Yeah, you hear that, and I've heard this used a lot, but like put your own, airplane metaphor, put your own oxygen mask on first, right? And
Yep.
I really agree with that. And I think, we do a lot of leadership development programs, and it's always leading yourself first.
Yep.
Start with that, create self-awareness. How can you cultivate self-awareness? Then
Yep.
how can you turn your view out, right? And how can you then develop others, right? So yeah, and I mean that's the journey I've been through too, right? Like before I even kind of knew I wanted to get into this field was like, who am I? Like, what is going on with me? Well, do I even like myself? And the answer was definitely no at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that. Okay.
I think
And
we don't do that enough though, right? And this is the thing, right? There might be busy leaders that are listening to this on like double speed on iTunes or Spotify or whatever, right?
yeah,
Because they don't
slow it
have time.
down.
Yeah, put it
You
back
won't
to
be able
one.
to understand Charlotte.
um, yeah, like we live in a very fast-paced world, and when we're living in a rush and we're
Yeah.
living with all of these stimulating responsibilities,
Mm,
which are also necessary when you're running a business, right? That's
yeah.
okay. It's your relationship with them. If we can start to master our relationship with time or
Mm,
our attitude towards time, then we've got space to
yeah.
then start to look at who am I. So it's creating the space to be able to do that, because a lot of people might be listening thinking, well, that's all right for you two. You run your own businesses. You can clearly
Yeah.
kind of do whatever you want to do. But actually, the argument could be had that is the opposite is true as well. But I think the having a reality check at some point, you've got to put the brakes on and zoom out is necessary for individual leaders, but also for groups of leaders,
Yeah.
and not just shirking well-being off to somebody else. It's their job to do it. It's like, no, it's a fluid thing, right? And it's a co-creation.
Yeah, love that. Where can people find you, my friend?
Charlotte Stebbing Mills on LinkedIn, and then everywhere else, The Wellness Theory. So that's YouTube, podcasts. We've got a Thrive in the Workplace podcast, which is obviously for leaders also that are looking to thrive in the workplace and improve their well-being. We also have a Stress Relief in Your Pocket podcast that is for any individuals that are looking to upgrade their own life experience when it comes to health, happiness, and high performance. And we haven't mentioned that we also have a Wellbeing Leaders Mastermind that both Sam and I have founded earlier this year, which is taking on a life of its own and supporting leaders within particularly the UAE at the moment, when it comes to their wellbeing strategy and what it is they need to do to move forward. So that's something really worth exploring. And we've obviously got a newsletter that's launching as well this month. So I would highly recommend you check that out as well.
Amazing. I just want to appreciate you for being who you are. I love the time we get to spend together, and I'm so grateful for you sharing your story. And I think you've really, yeah, you give me the drive to share mine even further. Even though I do it a bit with my stuff about addiction, but kind of going even deeper on that. And yeah, I'm so grateful for your friendship and your guidance, really, because you guide with the way you act. So yeah, I just want to say thank you for that, and thank you for sharing your story again.
Thank you so much, and likewise, it's a co-creation, and it only happens right when you really connect and take time to connect with people, and I feel like you give people the space. That you've definitely given me the space to do that, and I know you do with the teams that you work with as well. And I hope you do continue to share your story, because it holds so much value for people, in so many ways that you just can't even imagine. And so I hope to learn more about your story as well, as this story continues to unfold.
Totally, totally. So you can check Charlotte out, as she mentioned, on LinkedIn, and then wellnesstheory.com. Is it, Charlotte?
Yep.
Yeah,
Cool.
you got lots of free resources on there, don't you?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. So jump online, check Charlotte out. If you've liked this, like it, subscribe, share it with your mates. Check out braverleaders.com for our free resources as well, and pass them around as well. They're yours for the taking. So all that is left for me to do is say thank you once again, my friend. It's an absolute pleasure to spend. I think we kept it under 50 minutes, which is quite impressive for us. So lovely to spend another hour with you, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thank you so much.
Nice one.
Thanks for tuning in to Braver Leaders, the podcast where we discuss with leaders where they got leadership right, but also where they got it very, very wrong. If you'd like to know more, visit us on braverleaders.com, or you can email us directly on team@braverleaders.com. Stay tuned, and we'll see you very, very soon.